two species cannot occupy the same ecological niche at the same time. There are some experiments that were done. That experiment were done by growing um, some paramecia, right? Three species of paramecia. Species one is Paramecia aurelia. Species two is Paramecia caudatum. Actually, two species, I'm sorry, two species. So these two species of Paramecia, when they were grown in two separate flasks, when they were provided enough food, they actually they underwent, first of all, a lag phase, then an exponential phase, and then you had that they reach a carrying capacity, right? Same thing, the on with the caudatum here, we had an exponential growth that leveled off at some point. But now, interestingly, when the two species of Paramecia were put in the same flask, providing them with enough food to thrive, both of them, what was noticed, and this work, by the way, was done by G.F. Gause in 1930s, he showed that, well, the Paramecium aurelia would grow exponentially and then plateaus, while the caudatum will start growing exponentially, then they reach a maximum growth. And what interestingly happens is that the population of caudatum start decreasing until the whole population dies off. Now, let me remind you or tell you that there was enough food to sustain the growth of both organisms. However, only one is thriving, the other one is not. Actually, this phenomenon was called competition by exclusion, right? That competition by exclusion principle is observed almost in all ecosystems. Now, here we have, in a savanna, we have a lioness that has gotten a zebra. So that lioness is feeding on the zebra. You have some vultures around, and you have a hyena here standing and looking. So the lioness is going to eat the zebra. Now, question to you. Do you think that this lioness alone is going to eat this entire zebra? Think about that. I'm pretty sure you're going to say no. And I do agree with you, right? But now, here, let's assume that the lioness is done eating. She's full. The zebra is still there. A big chunk of the zebra, most of it actually is still there. And the lioness decides to lay down by the zebra, just to chill, while the hyena is here wanting to eat. So, what do you think is going to happen? Is the hyena going to come and get the meat from the zebra while the lioness is just there by the zebra? Okay, so I'll let you think about that. Now, well, for sure, this guy, the hyena, will not come get the food, in spite of the fact that the food is just there sitting. But they're not going to come. Why? Because historically, they know that the lioness is a threat to them. Okay? The lioness is a threat to them. So this guy here, the hyena, can literally starve to death, not because there is no food, but because there is someone sitting right there by the food that they know to be a threat. Therefore, well, if this guy, the lion, decides to stay around, well, the hyena eventually is going to go away. Or even the vultures here, they will try to get food, but they will not get the food as if the lion was not there. That is not going to happen, right? Okay, so again, this is competition by exclusion. All right. Organisms, in order to live together, they have to share resources. I mentioned the word resource partitioning earlier, and now I'm repeating resource partitioning here again. Now, this is in the context of an experiment that was done to show resource partitioning. Now, here you have three types of birds. You have the fuliginosa, fortis, and magninostris. Now, magninostris, because it has a huge beak, right? Okay, so we have a huge beak, intermediate beak, and a small beak. Now, this beak size are adapted to the food they typically eat. Now, when these organisms are on the same island, these three birds, well, they are going to grow different size of beaks. Okay? So the magninostri is going to have a big beak. Fortis is going to have an intermediate side beak, while the fuliginosa is going to have a small size beak. Now, if we take these two birds in different islands now, so there is no more competition, right? What we notice is that the fortis and the fuliginosa, they're going to have their beak that is going to have about the same size, which is the intermediate size, so that they can eat both small seeds and large seeds, right? While when they are all together, they specialize, right? This is what we call resource partitioning. So to avoid competition, well, we're going to eat different food so that we can thrive in the same environmental area. Now, in the community, mutualism allows organisms to actually benefit each other. Some examples of mutualism here, it's basically this ant here and the acacia. The acacia tree is providing shelter, right? So this little opening here are areas where the ants are going to go to actually hide and thrive, right? So the acacia provides shelter to this organism, to these ants, right? It also provides food, right? Because the ants are going to obtain food from the nectar. They are also going to obtain food from this extremity of the leaves that are actually going to be used for food, as food for the babies of the plants, right? On the other hand, though, the plants, the ants are benefiting the acacia because by the ants being here, some herbivores cannot just come and eat this plant, because the ants are going to be annoying to the herbivores, right? Therefore, the herbivores are going to stay away in as much as you have this ants here, right? So this is a relationship in which they both benefit each other. How about humans? Well, in your digestive tract, and specifically in your large intestine, you house a huge population of E. coli. You've heard of E. coli, it's a bacterium, right? Now, E. coli, while there are some bad guys, most of the E. colis are good for your body. Guess what? You provide food and shelter to E. coli, while E. coli provides vitamin K to you, and they also break down some fibers that is in the food you ingest, because you don't know how to break down fibers, but the bacteria have enzymes that know how to break down fibers so that they can provide you the extra nutrients that you did not extract from the waste, that is the fibers, right? So also, the presence of E. coli in our digestive tract is going to prevent some harmful bacteria from coming and establishing themselves. So this is a mutualistic relationship. Another mutualistic relationship that I would like to show you is the interdependence that we see between this white bark pine, this Clark's nutcracker, and the grizzly bear. Now, the nutcracker is actually getting some nuts from the pine tree, right? This nut, some of them, this seed, some of them, they eat them. Some of them, they're going to bury them in the ground, okay? Now, the one that are buried in the ground, with the grizzly bear, are going to come and eat them. And as the grizzly bear eat them, it goes through the digestive tract, and the grizzly bear is going to disperse the seeds. The nutcracker is also going to disperse the seed, which is good for the plant, because now the plant is going to have the opportunity to grow in places where there is bunch of food, right? And there is no competition between the trees of the same kind in the same area, right? So that's another mutualistic relationship. Now, communities needs a certain level of stability. That stability can be controlled by the different interactions organisms have one with another. Really, again, when I say organism, I mean species, right? So that ecologists have found that in a community, you have what we call keystone species. What are keystone species? Keystone species are the species that keep the community in balance, right? They keep the community in check, okay? So without this key species, the community will go out of balance. For instance, you may have an overgrowth of one particular kind of organism, right? Or diseases can strike because the community is not in balance. So loss of a keystone species can lead to extinction of other organisms. For instance, in terms of keystone species, we have the bats that are keystone species in the tropical rainforest, while the grizzly bear is a keystone species in the northwestern United States. Now, when we consider community and keystone species and we introduce some exotic species in a community, what happens is that this introduced species or exotic species do not have a natural predator. Because they don't have a natural predator, they don't have anything that keep them in balance. This end up affecting native species. Native species, also known as indigenous species to an ecosystem or to a given geographical area. Now, exotic species are a bad news in many instances. For instance, this Asian carp that was introduced in the United States, because they don't have natural predator here in the United States, they end up actually overpopulating streams and rivers and actually overfeeding on some other organisms, right? So that they are crowding the area, okay, and driving some other organisms to extinction. Another example is the emerald ashes borers. This little insect. This little insect actually is going to go underneath of the bark, and as they go underneath of the bark, they are actually going to damage the tree so that the trees are going to die. Okay, so the introduction of this organism in North America caused this trees, this very particular species of tree, to die off. Now, ecological systems are going to need some organisms that are producers, others that are consumers, and also environmental conditions are going to allow these ecosystems to remain at balance and to thrive, right? Now, ecosystems, again, it's living components and non-living components. Living components are biotic components, non-living components are abiotic components, right? Now, these two components are going to be very essential for the stability of an ecosystem. Now, at the very base of an ecosystem, we are going to have producers. Producers are the ones that create the amount of material that is needed to be used as source of food for other organisms who are the consumer, right? So the producers occur in three kinds. We're going to have the producers that are phototrophic producers and the producers that are chemotrophic producers. Actually, I should say two kind, right? Two kind. We have chemotrophic producers and phototrophic producers. These phototrophic producers, the chemoautotrophs, are going to actually use chemicals, in this particular instance in the depth of the sea, in the hydrothermal vents. You have some gas, hydrogen sulfide, that is released. That hydrogen sulfide can be used as source of energy by microorganisms, right? By using that hydrogen sulfide as source of energy, well, these microorganisms are able to convert non-organic source of food to organic source of food. Therefore, they are going to now constitute matter, and they are going to constitute matter for consumers, right? Now, more closer to us, we're going to have the photoautotrophs. The photoautotrophs are those autotrophs that are going to be self-reliant because they are using the sun as source of energy. As they capture the sun, they're now going to then use that energy to combine carbon dioxide and water through the process of photosynthesis so that organic molecules can be produced, including sugars, right? These sugars are now the one that are used by consumers, okay? So it always very important to ask in an ecosystem, what are the producers? What do they rely on to produce their food? And do we have a huge amount of food or a small amount of food, right? This is going to play a very important role as to the complexity of the community in an ecosystem. The less food we have, the less complex a community is going to be. The more food we have, the more complex a community is going to be in an ecosystem. Now, so we talked about the producers. Now let's talk about the consumers or heterotroph. Now, the producers are autotroph because they make their own organic molecule from inorganic molecule. The heterotroph, however, they feed from other organisms. That's why they are called heterotrophs, right? So they are going to use pre-performed organic nutrients to sustain their growth and reproduction. These are consumers, and consumers occur in many kinds. Some of them are herbivores, some of them are carnivores, some of them are omnivores, meaning they are both herbivores and carnivores. For instance, a caterpillar is a herbivore, right? A giraffe is a herbivore, while a praying a mantis is a carnivore, and a lion is a carnivore, okay? Now, in an ecosystem, while we have producers and consumers, we have a group of organisms that we actually don't really know how to classify, right? Because they feed on about anything but while they feed on about anything, that anything has to be dead. Okay? That anything has to be dead. These are decomposers. The decomposers are going to break down dead organic matter. A dead tree, a dead grass, a dead sunflower, dead lion, dead human, dead zebra, dead fish, and so on and so forth. Now, these decomposers are also called detritivores. I want you to remember that they are also called detritivores. Okay? These decomposers occur in two kinds. We have bacteria and we have fungi. I want you to remember that, right? We have bacteria and we have fungi. These two are the ones that are able to break down dead organisms. All right, so as we dive in an ecosystem, we are going to ask the following question. How does energy and chemical flow in an ecosystem? Well, we asked these questions earlier, not in this chapter, but in the previous chapter. But now we are going to address that question again. Okay? So know that the flow of chemical and energy in an ecosystem actually occurs in a very specific manner. One, energy flows one way. Energy flows one way from producer to consumer, while chemicals flow from producer to consumer to producer. It's actually a cycle, right? So energy flows one way from producer to consumer. The chemicals are going to cycle in an ecosystem, and both the cycling of chemicals and the unidirectional flow of energy are essential to maintain the dynamics of an ecosystem. I already mentioned that earlier, I think, in the very first chapter. Now, when we look at this slide here, what do we see? Now, let's focus on energy. The energy initially comes from the sun. That energy that comes from the sun is going to be captured by producers. These producers are going to manufacture organic molecules from carbon dioxide and water. Eventually, that biomass that is produced here is going to be used as source of energy for herbivores. Notice that the energy that a producer obtained from the sun, not all of it goes toward the formation of a biomass, right? Some of it is reflected as heat or lost as heat. Likewise, when the herbivore consumes the producer, well, some of the energy is going to go toward growth, reproduction, metabolic processes, but some of the energy is going to also be lost as heat. Eventually, the rabbit is going to be used as source of food, right? So that the decomposers are going to obtain energy from the consumers, right? And that energy, some of it goes toward the building up of the decomposers. Some of it is going to be lost as heat, so that energy always flows one way from producer to consumer. However, all energy that is found in an ecosystem can be traced back to the sun, right? So that's for energy. Let's take a look at the chemicals. The producers are going to obtain carbon dioxide and water, combining together to form organic molecules. These organic molecules are going to be consumed by the herbivores. These herbivores, they're going to consume that, they're going to grow, they're going to poop, they're going to pee. So pooping and peeing and growing, all of that is chemical, right? These chemicals are not going to ever exit the ecosystem. It's going to remain in the ecosystem because eventually this rabbit is going to die. When the rabbit dies, it's going to decompose. And as it gets decomposed, the chemicals go where? In the ground, right? Eventually, some chemicals are going to end up in the atmosphere, right? And eventually, again, these chemicals are going to be used by producers so that in terms of amount of matter, matter actually never goes anywhere. It stays within the ecosystem, right? Remember, remember or maybe know that the law of conservation of matter says that as you run chemical reactions, the amount of matter you started with is the amount of matter you end with. It's only that the arrangement of the elements is going to change from the beginning to the end, right? But at the end of the day, the amount of matter will remain exactly the same. If you add up the product and the waste, you're going to find that you have the exact same amount of what you started with at the first place, all right? So the energy in an ecosystem actually is going to be used in such a way that not all the energy that a consumer consumes is going to be made available to the consumer that is consuming the organism that consumes at the first place, okay? I may be a little bit confusing here, but please bear with me. Now, what I mean, it's that as the giraffe here reaches to this tree and eats some leaves, all the energy that is being harvested by the giraffe what is that energy going to go toward? Well, for a given amount of energy that this giraffe get in one meal, some of it is going to go toward cellular respiration. Now, is the energy going toward cellular respiration is going to account for the mass of the giraffe? The answer is no. Okay? Now, the energy that goes toward growth, does it account toward the mass of the giraffe? The answer is yes. Okay? The energy that goes toward death, excretion, defecation, does it going to go toward the consumer that is actually going to eat the giraffe? The answer is no. So really, the only fraction of energy that a carnivore is going to obtain out of eating a giraffe for the specific meal the giraffe got, it's only going to be a very small fraction. Very small fraction. And that fraction represents only 10% of the energy that the giraffe consumed. All right? For a given meal, obviously. Which means that if that giraffe consumes, I'm just saying anything, 5,000 kilocalorie, okay? Only, oops, no, 10%, so only, oops, oh, sorry. Only, out of 5,000 kilocalorie that the giraffe would consume, only 500 would be made available to the next trophic level. Only 500, right? For 5,000 that was used first. All right. Okay. So the food web is very complex. That food web, it's going to show what is feeding on what. A food web, it's going to be about what is feeding on what. So here we are showing two food webs. One is the grazing food web. Two is the detrital food web. In the grazing food web that is shown in green, we see that the oak tree can be used as source of food for many different organisms, right? So we have some birds that are going to feed on the seeds. We have the chipmunk that feeds on the seed. We have the mice that also feed on the seed. But the mice also can feed on the little leaves here, right? We have the leaf-eating insects here that can feed on the leaves. We have the rabbit that can feed on the leaves. We have deers that can feed on the leaves. Now, then we have a fox that can feed on the small herbivores, right? So we're going to have all the carnivores here, right, that can feed on the herbivores, okay? So notice that the oak tree, there is not only one thing and exclusively one thing of the oak tree that is being eaten. You have different components of the oak tree that is eaten, and different organisms in the grazing food web are eating different components of the oak tree. And eventually, those herbivores are going to be eaten by the carnivores here. Okay? So you have a diversity of which organisms are eating what on an oak tree. By the same token, when we look at the digital food web, we're going to have that all these organisms actually are going to die. Okay? They are going to die and they are going to be decomposed, right? This decomposition, it's going to cause some chemicals to be made available, right? And now we're going to see that these chemicals are going to be used as nutrients for some other organisms that are going to be used as food for other organisms. So eventually, we see that in a food web, the system is very complex in terms of who is feeding on what and how. Now, this is so because you notice that earlier we said that for one meal that a giraffe got, only 10% of the energy the giraffe gathered from eating plants is made available to the next trophic level, right? Only 10%. So these organisms here are going to diversify their diet and not eat only one single thing and exclusively one thing, to actually not limit the amount of energy they can get. So they have to diversify their food, right? If they don't, then they are not going to have enough energy to sustain themselves. And actually, that limit as to how much energy is made available to the next trophic level, it's what limits the trophic levels in an ecosystem. And what are trophic levels? Trophic levels are basically what is feeding at what level. So we are going to have producers, right? These producers are going to feed consumers. But in consumers, you have primary consumers that are herbivores. You have secondary consumers that are carnivores. And you can have tertiary consumers that are other carnivores, right? So we are going to see that this is actually going to impact the community and the biomass in the community. So in a trophic level, a food chain is going to represent a diagram that shows a single path in the flow of energy in an ecosystem. The trophic levels, however, they are going to show the nourishment level in which a particular organism is fitting in an ecosystem or in a food chain or in a food web, right? So if you consider, for instance, a photosynthetic organism here, that is a producer, that photosynthetic organism is going to provide food for a herbivore, a caterpillar here. The amount of energy gathered there, only 10% of it is going to be made available to the carnivore here. That carnivore is the secondary consumer, right? The caterpillar being the primary consumer, right? And then we're going to have this bird of prey here that is going to be a tertiary consumer that is only going to obtain 10% of the energy that was obtained by this bird in its meal, right? Now, from here, we are going to dive into the ecological pyramid. In the ecological pyramid, it shows that if you have a certain amount of biomass, that biomass is the amount of producers that is going to be eaten. For a meal that is 1,000 kilocalorie or calorie, whichever way you want to put it, right? Only 10% is made available by this caterpillar after eating all of this. And that 10% represents only 100, right? Calorie or kilocalorie. And then That 100, as it is eaten, as it is eaten by this organism, after digesting and doing all the metabolic processes, only 10% of that is going to be made available to the next trophic level, which means only 10 calories or kilocalories, right? And finally, as this bird of prey feeds on this secondary consumer, only 10% is going to be made available to the next trophic level. So what we notice is that we go from 1,000 in the biomass to only 1 calorie or kilocalorie. Question: if you have a quaternary consumer, okay, remember, this is a primary consumer, a secondary consumer, a tertiary consumer. If we have a quaternary consumer here, question, it's what amount of energy is going to be obtained by that quaternary consumer when you only have one left here out of the 1,000 left here. It's very limited. Because it's very limited, that explains why the trophic levels are limited to only 3 or 4 at the very max in trophic level. So that's one. Two, that also explains why living organisms in a community and in an ecosystem cannot feed on only one single type of food. In other words, this caterpillar is not going to eat exclusively this type of plant. That is not going to happen. It's not sustainable, right? This bird is not going to eat exclusively this caterpillar. In fact, this bird is going to eat this caterpillar, but it's also going to feed on seeds and other source of food, right? To be able to sustain itself. Diversity. It's not just in terms of maintaining biodiversity, right? This is just a shout out to conservation, right? But also, very importantly, it's about survival. It's about diversifying your source of food so that you never run out of food and you are able to reproduce and leave behind offsprings.